I want to thank Donna and Mary and Debbie and whoever else weighed in on inviting me here, and I want to thank Mizzou Advantage. And I want to apologize because right away I'm going to go off script and not talk about affordable food, because I think the emphasis is not necessarily the food as much as, to me, the affordability. Okay, so I'm going to talk about food affordability. I've got the shortest definition so far. All right, to me, affordability has to do whether or not a family has the resources necessary to purchase the food that it needs to maintain food security. I mean, it's fairly simple. In definition, fairly complicated in terms of figuring out what it means and what are the factors that influence food affordability and its relationship to food insecurity. So I've got a 5-minute agenda. I want to talk a little bit about how we at the in the Interdisciplinary Center for Food Security measure food affordability. And I'm just going to be talking about work we're doing in Missouri. The important question to me is, so what? Why are we measuring this, and what does it tell us? And especially about the relationship between food affordability and food security. And then talk about some of the problems we have with our own definition. Okay? So basically, in the Hunger Atlas that just came out, that we just produced, we measure food affordability in a fairly simplistic way. Okay, what we're looking at are basically two variables. How much does food cost, and how much do people have in terms of income, and what percentage of income is necessary in order to purchase the food that they need. So I'm going to show you some maps. All of these maps are divided into quintiles, 5 parts. Usually low is lighter colored, high is darker colored. Okay, so this is based on data from Feeding America and the map, the meal gap. And it basically shows you how much it costs to buy 21 meals in various counties of Missouri. It's a pretty varied pattern in the state, but the one thing I might point out is that costs range up to 50%. That there are some counties where 21 meals, average cost is about $40 based on this data, and in some counties it's up to $60. So that's the average cost for a week's worth of meals per individual. And here is median per capita income. Okay, and this probably looks a lot more familiar to you, okay, because you can see the high persistence poverty counties in the southern part of the state, in the northern part of the state, and the wealthier counties around the cities. So basically, we take per capita household income and divide it on a week's basis, so divide it by 52, and then divide the meal costs into that, and we get a percentage of the weekly income that's required to buy meals. So in Missouri, it's our belief that the average household requires about 17% of its income to purchase meals. But that ranges from a low of 10% in St. Charles County to upwards of 30% down in Carter County and in parts of the Ozarks. So you can see that poverty and income are real drivers of the percentage of income that's required to purchase minimum food for household members in the state. It's not surprising that this pattern exists in Missouri, and I just want to caution you that within any particular county, of course, how much an individual spends on food has a lot to do with their income. Okay, so the lower your income on the left side, moving to higher incomes, the greater the percentage of your household budget has to go to food. Okay, and that's the blue part of these bars. So lower income people spend a much higher percentage of their income on food than do wealthier individuals in the state. Okay, so once we've done that, the question is, why do we care? Well, we care because we think there should be some relationship between food affordability and food security. Okay, and as most people sort of assume, food affordability has a lot to do with how much does food cost and what percent of income are people spending on food. We might assume theoretically that as costs go down, as the percent of income goes down that's required for food, more people should be food secure. Okay, so here's the curve, and you can even look at especially the last 10 to 15 years, and here's levels of food insecurity and hunger in Missouri. Okay, they're kind of moving in different directions, although there have been food spikes in 2008, 2011, and so on. The percent of people in Missouri who are food insecure has risen by almost 100% over the last 10 years. It's about 16%. Now, the percent of people who experience hunger in terms of reduced meals, skipping meals, reduced portions, has almost tripled over the last 10 years in Missouri. So clearly, percent of income spent on food is not synonymous with food security status in the state of Missouri. Okay, and here you can see on the left side, the counties, the food affordability index, and here is the percent of people by county who experience hunger in the state. Some correspondence, but not perfect correspondence. There are counties that have low food affordability. In other words, it requires less money, but high levels of food insecurity and hunger. There are some counties that have higher food costs and lower levels of food insecurity. So that causes us to wonder, what are other factors that are kind of intermediary between food affordability and food security? And here I have to acknowledge the work of two grad students, but one's no longer a grad student, Michelle Kaiser, who graduated from Missouri about 2 years ago and now teaches at Ohio State, and Annie Kafer, who is a PhD student in rural Soch. And what they've been looking at, and we've been looking at using Hunger Atlas data and some other data, is what are factors that influence whether or not the same two families that have the same levels of income, the same levels of cost, some are food insecure, some are not. Well, big one, and this was mentioned before, is SNAP benefits. Okay, SNAP benefits are a critical key barrier, buffer, between food security and food insecurity with hunger. I'll just have to say that for 2/3 of the families that we have contact with, it's not a shock, it's a chronic condition. That they depend on food stamps, they depend on food pantries, they depend on other community initiatives in order to be food secure. Okay, and that's not going to change with employment because these are disabled, elderly, people at minimum wage positions, and so on. But SNAP is a critical thing, and it's especially critical in rural areas. So rural areas often have high eligibility for the SNAP program, and they have, on average, more than 10% lower participation rates than urban areas. Okay, so in rural areas, we see high levels of food insecurity matching high levels of food affordability or cost of food, primarily because they're not participating, they don't have that buffer of the SNAP program that they have in urban areas. But it's not the only variable. We look at things like housing affordability. In urban areas, actually, more households have what they call unaffordable housing, meaning they spend more than 30% of their income on housing. That's unaffordable housing. So it's much more of a factor. The spending of income on housing is much more of a factor that creates food insecurity in urban areas than in rural areas. What I'm getting at is that food affordability is a measure, is a simple objective measure, but you have to look at it in the context, the social context of households, okay? And what income and what monies do they have available? I showed a slide before. You know this, that households that have limited resources have to make hard decisions between food and housing and utilities and medicine and healthcare and gasoline even. And food tends to be fairly low on the totem pole. Okay, they have to pay their utilities, they have to pay their rent, okay, and food is the last thing. So even if we can say that food costs are low in this household or relatively low, if they have no money left for food, it's unaffordable. That's the point I'm trying to make. Okay, that's really my take-home message. Usually the measure of food affordability is an objective measure. It uses cost, it uses income, it uses the other factors that we've seen up here. But the experience of food affordability and its relationship to food security is a subjective experience based on a holistic enterprise within the household. And that's my take-home message. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Debbie Kelly. I'm in the Department of Ag Systems Management over in the Ag Engineering Building. I'm going to come from a perspective of sustainable agriculture, but I'm also going to come from the aspect of personnel or personal, because this is a real personal issue with me for multiple reasons. As far as sustainable agriculture is concerned, affordability to me and to a bunch of my colleagues in the area of sustainability is that the farmer who grows or raises food receives a fair salary for what they're actually doing, and that they're able to live on the land in their own comfortable fashion. It comes kind of as a little bit of a three-legged stool, is what we always say in sustainability, is that food is economically viable so that the farmer actually is able to have a living salary, a living wage, and that they're being paid a fair price for whatever it is that they're growing or raising. It also means that it's environmentally safe and that they're thinking about and protecting the land and the future of where our food is actually going to be coming from. And it's also meaning that it's socially acceptable and that others believe that what they're doing is good and that they're taking care of not only the land that they're living on, but also their communities in which they also live in. The concept of all of this is that they're trying to come to the very center part. In that particular area is where we're hoping that a lot of our farms and farmers are coming from. From a personal perspective, I have a very interesting story. It's how I prefer to feed my family. And the first one looks at it is that it fits my pocketbook. I came from a situation where we had my former husband and I were both employed. He became unemployed. He was unemployed for about 4 to 5 years. I've always been the breadwinner of the family. And for about a year and a half, almost 2 years, I couldn't feed my family. So I actually, working at the University of Missouri, everybody goes, oh, well, you can afford to eat. Well, guess what? I couldn't afford to eat. And I actually relied on my church, I relied on my friends, and I also went to, and I always forget if it's the food bank or the food pantry, where you can go once a month. You have to bring in your Social Security cards and the number of people that live in your family, and then you can get to eat whatever is going to be available for what you think you're going to have for that month. Actually, they limit you depending upon the size of your family. And so the only meat that I was allowed to get that time that I went was the meat that was inside of the can of ravioli. And that's all that I had available. Most of it was not what I would consider good and healthy food, in the sense that there was a lot of sugar, it was a lot of noodles and starches. But yet it did help me to feed my family. Yes, Hamburger Helper was ate a lot at my house, unfortunately. And it was very sad. At this point right now, the situation is different. I am presently divorced, but yet I still have 2 college-age sons. I'm a single mom now. I have no financial help from my former husband. He's still unemployed. So I'm still trying to feed my children as well. One is away at college, but he still calls home and says, Mom, I need money for food, because he still needs to eat as well. My other son lives at home, even though he's in college here. I still have to be able to feed my family. I'm still finding it very difficult, although it's not as difficult and hard as it was before. Do I still eat Hamburger Helper from time to time? Yeah, at least once a week for sure. We have that, just simply because of how cheap it is. Do I bring it for lunch the next day as a leftover? You're darn right I am. Am I able to put a lot of vegetables and fruits with that meal? No. However, I know that we're not going hungry. I don't have to rely on a bag of groceries that someone at my church has given to me, or a friend who just stops by and brings me a piece of ham, or whatever it might be. So it's not only those folks that live in food deserts, the kinds of folks that you think of that live in poor settings or have very low incomes. It's also people such as myself. So food affordability goes in many directions. The other thing is I'm very knowledgeable about the food system working in agriculture. I know how our food is produced. And so I am very particular in the types of things and the kinds of foods that I want to purchase for my kids. I like to read the labels, and if I can't pronounce the words for the ingredients, I really want to try to stay away from it if I possibly can. I also know that some of our food systems and how our food is actually raised, the animals are raised, has a lot of concern for me. And that's a totally different issue and a different topic. But I'm aware of all those things, so I'm very concerned. I also want to eat what I call real food. The stuff that's in that picture right there, that's all from the Columbia Farmers Market. All of that food, the richness of what that is, I mean, that's, to me, is really good and nutritional value. So that goes with the healthy and the taste good. And then I also understand what it means to be able to feed and buy locally, and what that means for not only myself by eating good, but also what it means for the farmers and also what it means for my community. So my main points is that food needs to be grown and raised with the environment in mind, but also sociability, and also that the farmers are paid a decent price, but also that I have and am able to make an adequate purchase for how I would like to feed my family. Thanks.
Okay, so the bad news is I didn't run quite such a tight ship on time as I might have hoped. But we heard wonderfully rich presentations, I think, from all of our panelists, and we're now ready for comments and questions from all of you or from the panelists for each other. Now, don't all start at once. Yes, please, in the back.
If you would.
I can go off Sandy Raccoon's graphs, and this probably confuses a lot of people in this room. But you look at those maps of those counties around the state that have a lot of poverty and a lot of food insecurity. And I also know that those folks represent the same people in Congress that are trying to decimate the SNAP program. And I don't understand the connection, and I don't know if anybody would like to comment on that. But it's so obvious to me, but there's a gigantic disconnect. I don't see it.
Anybody want to take that up?
I can't say for sure, Mike, but I would guess that the people who are on SNAP benefits are not the ones that these congressmen are representing. You know, in terms of where the power is and where influences are, if they were there talking to people who receive SNAP benefits, they would realize how critical they were as, you know, in allowing families to survive. So I just can't believe they have any contact with people who are on SNAP.
I would say there's probably a discrepancy between the data too. I spend a lot of time in the food atlas because I go county to county. 75% of the state, at least on the last atlas, I haven't looked at this current one, income qualified for food stamps, just on income alone. But you know, there's other factors that go in on whether they can receive them, whether it's savings, whether it's personal wealth, or other things, but also just the broader social net and community net. Only 12% actually received the benefits. So when we look at that broader economy, there's a lot of other factors in it. But the people whose income alone would qualify them was at 75% on the previous atlas. I haven't looked at the current one.
So I'll just remind us that, you know, we are in the middle of Farm Bill debate. We have a bill off the House floor, a bill off the Senate floor. We have not conferenced those, so we don't know what we get at the end of the day from a SNAP perspective. You know, yes, they're very different, but I don't think Congress has really ultimately decided what we do on the Farm Bill, and as long as we continue with status quo, there's no change to SNAP benefits. So the current shutdown has nothing to do with SNAP per se, and we have a long ways to go to debate the Farm Bill in terms of getting to the end and figuring out what the will of Congress is at the end of the day.
Is it common knowledge to everyone here, I wonder, or would it be worth saying a word or two about the connection between the Farm Bill and SNAP benefits, how that came to be? I mean, why SNAP benefits, in other words, are in the Farm Bill and not in some other kind of legislation?
It's my favorite topic, one of my. You know, all of it's called the Farm Bill, but frankly, most of the Farm Bill is a food bill. The biggest chunk of change, and it's a big chunk, goes to, you know, the SNAP program's part of the Farm Bill. It always has been. The WIC program is part of the Farm Bill. The free and reduced lunch program, part of the Farm Bill. All of the, and I don't know what percentage of the Farm Bill it makes up, those three programs?
About 75% today is for those programs.
Yeah. And, you know, it's a historical, I think, I don't want to say accident, that that all of the food programs are within the USDA. Personally, I think there's some inconsistency, in fact, some contradictions, and maybe not some great ideas of having it in the USDA, but that's another topic.
Yes, I take a very pragmatic role here for a minute. If, you know, I'm a member of the Ag Committee, do I want to give up 70% of the money that might be available to do things? So I think there was some reason why, once we got a hold of SNAP program in the Farm Bill, the ag committees certainly don't want to give up that ability. Now, maybe today they would think differently about it, but historically, I think it was a larger pot of money to deal with. And, you certainly had a situation where you needed rural and urban folks to come together on a package, and it seemed to work traditionally in a nice way that maybe those that were more interested in SNAP benefits were able to get some of the things they needed back home. At the same time, farm programs and rural legislators found support. So it was an interesting marriage that created enough votes. Anytime Congress wants to pass a bill, what do they need? 218 and maybe 61 now on the, it depends on whether they need 2/3 or not on the Senate side. But, you just need enough votes. So it's an interesting way to marry together different interests to try to get something passed. And so again, I go, we're in a very interesting time right now where we've split those apart on the House side in particular. I will say they got married back together in terms of what happened in the last few days, because procedurally they had to get SNAP and farm programs had to get married back together on the House side to conference with the Senate bill. My understanding is those SNAP benefits only go for 3 years, where the Farm Bill would try to be authorized for 5. And so I think those that want to permanently split those have said, hey, now all of a sudden in 3 years I got to do something on SNAP, but I don't have to on the Farm Bill till 5. So it's more of a way to think about that permanent way to cut those apart. That has a long battle to get to the end. I don't know what the outcome's going to be, and I'm not going to stand up here and say what's right or wrong, but to say that a Senate package that cuts $3 billion in food stamps and a House package that cuts $39 billion are miles apart is an understatement.
Sandy, do you have?
Yeah, I don't know how much you want. I have a fairly radical opinion. I'm worried about hunger, and I guess my bottom line is, if you're worried about hunger, the USDA is not in the business of getting rid of hunger. The USDA is in the business of producing and marketing food, of trade, and so on, and their business is not instituting social programs to actually get rid of hunger. It would be like putting the poverty program in the Bureau of Economic Development. Personally, we need my personal opinion is we need to take the food programs out of the USDA and establish a separate agency for that, just like we do with AID. We address international food programs not through the USDA, but through USAID and the Feed the Future program. We should do the same with domestic, but there's this really critical political alliance. A lot of people think my ideas are crazy because it will break up that political alliance that keeps these programs going.
Next question or comment, Ray?
Yeah, there are 2 programs that you mentioned, Sandy, one being WIC and one being SNAP. WIC actually limits the type of food that people can get. Would that be a more effective way of having SNAP, since we're interested in good food? And the stories are, whether they're true or not, is that people buy bad food with SNAP stamps. So should we have a different way of distributing or giving away SNAP, similar to WIC?
I mean, I don't know what my opinion would be is that they've tried it. I mean, they floated different ideas, cutting out soda pop. And they ran into a lot of resistance in trying to do that, because soda pop is a fair piece of SNAP expenditures. They've tried going the opposite way, allowing SNAP benefits to be used at fast food restaurants.
Yeah. Real quick, on that particular thing about soda pop, was it the consumers that fought back or the soda pop companies? I had heard that it was the soda pop companies that did not want it.
That's right.
So is that really a food program or a soda pop subsidy program? So, yeah, it goes back to, are we looking at hunger or are we looking at subsidizing soda pop?
I think we have an issue too with price versus cost on this. With the assistance, we do get the money to help someone buy that product. We still have issues having access to that product in dramatic levels, especially in rural areas. I mean, we talk a lot about the food deserts in the cities, but when you have people who have geographic separation in these rural counties and other areas, having the fresh foods and or perishable foods at access at a time they can buy them regularly is a serious problem. So that's just one piece of the puzzle. We can talk about how people pay for their food all we want. We still have problems producing a lot of the food that we eat. In 1950, half of the produce we consumed in this country came from our backyards. I don't think we're going to go back to that. But in 1986, we had a surplus of vegetables, and now we import 40% of them. So how this money gets moved around and how we have this food accessible are two pieces of the puzzle. We can't just talk about the economics without talking about the total economy again and going back to the big picture.
If I could just add one thing, and that is sort of a plug for next week's panel. To a certain extent, I think Ray's question begins to move us over in the direction of the discussion about what is fair food, because it might incorporate ideas of personal autonomy in choice. So that kind of bridges from affordability to fair. So that's just a plug to stay tuned next week for further discussion of those issues. And then next question, please.
I just wanted to seek some clarification. My understanding of the funding for National School Lunch Program and WIC comes from the Healthy and Hunger-Free Kids Act. Is it being included in the Farm Bill as a change? Or is...
So those are split between the two. So USDA has part of WIC and school lunch, is the best of my knowledge, but a part of it is also in other agencies as well. So it's not totally run by USDA. So part of it funded by the Farm Bill, part of it funded other ways. So that's why the confusion. I will say on SNAP itself, and Ray's idea is an interesting one. For me, it's what's the cost of implementing SNAP like the WIC program? And I'm not certain I know the answer to that, but I think it's important in terms of what's it take to get that product out there, because you're going to have to move a lot more product than you do through WIC if you want SNAP to be a similar program to how WIC's done. And does that cost more or less relative to the benefits you get by doing it that way?
Well, and as a bridge to the healthy panel that we had last week, the cost also comes in the $150 billion a year that it costs to treat obesity-related illnesses that are often linked to sugar-sweetened beverages.
Mary, do you want to ask a question?
Am I loud enough to not?
No, I'll repeat the question.
We need it for
the
recording purposes. Wait, Mary, we need it for the. You may say something profound, Mary.
I doubt it. But I actually have a question for Scott. But I also wanted to point out that the recipients in the SNAP program are much different than the recipients in the WIC program, because the WIC program is limited to pregnant and nursing mothers and children under 2. So the nutritional the nutritional needs of those recipients are quite different. So I think that your point about costs is a really interesting one, because implementing it for totally different kinds of recipients might be pretty interesting. But my question is, I actually had a question for you, Scott, about if you liked the Global Food Security Index, if you think that's a good index, and then how do they account for externalities in that? And you might want to talk about what an externality is.
Yeah, so a good question, and really a point that I meant to make as a good economist. So, we often talk about supplying food as cheaply as possible, and we often forget about there may be externalities to that process. And I mean externalities, we could take cases of a large processing facility in one area of the state of Missouri who puts excess burden on the school system by educating folks that likely don't speak English. Those kind of externalities matter. And so it's not just the pure cost of food. And so I think as we think about all of these issues related to food, it's important that those are talked about as important from an economist point of view. The whole discussion for me about where's food produced, I learned early on about comparative advantage in economics, and I still believe it's at play today. Those that produce food the cheapest tend to be the places where we locate production. And we are trying to do it as efficiently as possible. Now, the Global Food Security Index, I think is a good economic index. I like So number one, I like to be able to quantify the issue as best I can. I like that they went further than just to say it's percentage of income spent on food. I think that is way too simple of a definition. And the fact that they went far enough to collect data on some other outlying issues that I think are related to affordability, I give them credit for. I think you had a lot of folks that worked on that represent a lot of different global organizations that we're trying to incorporate as much as possible. So affordability being one section of that overall Global Food Security Index. I just wanted to talk about the affordability part, but there are other components to that index that I think are important. Defining the problem makes it easier to discuss alternatives to it, and defining it in a quantitative way has always been my approach. That's why I tend to like those kinds of indexes.
Can I follow up on that question, though? So according to the the index, the U.S. is number one in terms of global food security? Isn't it ranked number one?
No,
I thought last time. What
it was
number?
top 5.
It's top 5. But if you compare the number of people or the percent of people in the U.S. with other industrialized nations who are food insecure or experience hunger, our rates are much higher than, say, Canada, for example, than the United Kingdom, than the Scandinavian countries. So I guess people ask me, and I don't know the answer because I don't know the index as well, how can we have higher levels of food insecurity yet be ranked so high in terms of global food security?
Yeah, so I always go there. There's all kinds of ways to measure this, and I'm not going to stand up here and say that's the right one, but I always go, let's find the alternatives and debate different ways to construct the index about which one is better or which one does a better job of representing. I'm a firm believer there's probably no right answer, but being able to debate the numbers or debate alternatives makes it easier for us then to find the solutions that actually solve or make changes to that index. And that's what I'm more interested in. And it's unfortunate that we don't have better data. I think that's one of the issues that I saw them debate was from the data we have available to try to measure this global food security, it's pretty limited around the world. And so how do we do a better job of this quantification of the problem? And you're talking about relative issues. Those relative issues matter a lot. I don't disagree. And so I think it's important for us to look at these alternative ways to construct indices that maybe are alternatives to what we see out there today.
I think this gets back to that third pillar, the community. I mean, we all view, and affordability really comes down to the community that we're in. And when we judge these things, when make those value judgments between cost and price, if I'm food insecure and I'm just trying to figure out how to feed my family, my community view is getting pretty small. If I'm working with a town, it's a little bigger, and it's a little bigger. And, we have to have as much information as we can going in this, and there's not cookie cutter solutions to any of these. That's kind of why I use these general principles. If I'm following these general rules of nature and trying to keep the personal stuff out of the way, I can close some gaps. But when I start to get this extraneous stuff involved and I start defining things that aren't me or other people, that's when we get askew. So, I mean, it comes down to that, it's the community, the resources, and the life amongst them. And as that community grows, that all those things grow, and you have to take all that into account. Unfortunately, not everybody has the ability to view broader bases because they are limited to what they have to deal with. But as we start judging that for other people, it gets a lot more difficult.
I would like to make a couple of comments. One is, in terms of WIC, yes, it's true that the people are defined by pregnant, lactating, or postpartum women who aren't lactating, children up to age 5, and infants. But one of the major differences between that and SNAP-Ed is that it's based upon an assessment, a nutritional assessment. So the food package is designed to provide those foods that have been shown to be missing in Americans' diets. There are a lot of people who are on WIC and on SNAP-Ed as well, or SNAP as well, and they're also going to food pantries. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that I'm just wondering, I don't remember anybody saying this. Now, I could have spaced out because, I was the timer, so I could have missed it. But I didn't hear anyone talk about the farm subsidies that are included in the Farm Bill and what effect those have on the cost of food. Can anyone speak to that?
You're the policy guy.
Well, so today, really the two things I think we need to talk about. One are direct payments that are going to producers. Those direct payments are not tied to current production or current prices, so they're payments that farmers are receiving on a regular basis. I would say those are not very important to increasing supplies of food in this country, i.e. since they're decoupled from production and price, and I don't have to produce to get them, I probably don't get a lot of additional production occurring because of those payments. I think when you look at the Farm Bill debate that's been going on the last couple of years, it's why those are the payments that we're trying to cut, or eliminate. I shouldn't say cut, eliminate. Everybody's ready to eliminate direct payments. So that has been a change as prices have risen. We've gotten rid of countercyclical payments and marketing loan gains that were probably more helpful in keeping production higher because we moved so high on prices for many of these grain and oilseed commodities. Crop insurance has been the new feature of farm policy that's important. So this notion of should we be protecting, and you can talk about revenue-based products for producers. So not only is it a yield risk, but a price risk. Those are the programs that if you ask farmers today, they're most interested in because they've provided a much better safety net. I would say those have been more helpful in terms of keeping supplies of ag commodities at higher levels. I think there's a lot of folks who would like to see crop insurance subsidies cut in front of us. I think when you look at both versions of the Farm Bill from both the House and Senate side, they actually provide some supplemental payments from an insurance perspective. So, I think crop insurance is really what we're headed in terms of farm policy if we can ever get a Farm Bill passed. Those are probably helpful, but at the end of the day, I go in this country, if you look at the broad data, what percentage of the retail dollar gets back to farmers? It's 15 cents or less, depending on the commodity that you might want to talk about. So although we might generate additional farm supplies of many of these commodities, I don't think they affect retail prices that much because frankly, the cost of marketing, transportation, processing, et cetera, have garnered a much larger share of that dollar than they did 20 or 30 years ago.
Yes, question up here, please. Just hang on one second.
Could you also speak to the difference in the subsidies compared to traditional commodity crops and vegetables, fruits, nuts, things like that, and how that might factor into food affordability as it relates to more what we would consider healthy foods, what we talked about last week, which would be access to fruits and vegetables?
Yeah, so I would say traditionally we've tended to think about field crops as the ones that we've seen large subsidies, or I shouldn't say large subsidies, but the ones that we've provided as program crops: corn, soybeans, sorghum, barley, oats, cotton, rice. You don't hear me say a lot about fruits and vegetables when I start listing those off. Those haven't been of primary interest from those writing farm legislation. Historically, I would say that in some cases they probably thought there was a much better arrangement from producer to retail in terms of those contracts that were available in some of the fruit and vegetable areas. I'm not trying to take a stand one way or the other in talking about this. Now, I will say Debbie Stabenow, being chairwoman of Senate Ag Committee, has probably gotten more support towards fruit and vegetables coming from Michigan than we've seen in the past. So I think, there might be some added money there, but it's pretty around the edges. It's not like we all of a sudden have some type of support program for those commodities. I do think we're looking at expansion to crop insurance that could in fact cover many of those fruit and vegetable sectors as well. So that might be the part that begins to help us in terms of, is it, and this may get to what's fair in terms of farm policy and what commodities get support, what don't get support. Crop insurance has certainly been trying to be broadened in terms of the commodity coverage it has. I think the problem that we face is that when you look, there's a lot of folks who would like to see us cut crop insurance subsidies. If you cut too hard, I think then that starts to affect the number of commodities that are included.
I need to hop in here 1 minute. You know, being the guy who does work for the government, nobody calls me and asks me, how can I grow things to get more subsidies? Most people call me and ask me how to make money. And, you know, as you talked about the average return to the farmer, the actual average for the majority of the crops and the products that we grow, the commodity crops, is about 7 cents on the retail dollar. We grow 400% of those things that we consume. So 4 times what we consume, we grow those, and the majority of it's exported, which is important to feed the world. But we're paying 28 cents on the retail dollar for the food that we import to eat. So there's this balance in the overall economy, or how are we going to balance this thing out? More people call me wanting to know, how do I get away from fungible items, things that can be interchanged? You know, when you deal with a commodity-based thing, it's automatically more intrinsic in value on that value, or extrinsic on that value side. It's how can I relate it to this other product or other things? And traditionally, the food in the grocery store has 8 to 9 degrees of separation between the consumer. You know, you're closer to Kevin Bacon than the bacon in the rack.